I'm going to introduce a couple of guys here who many of you know, Henry Canipe and John Hildreth. Henry is the management consulting practice leader for Mott McDonald. He's also the new chair of the AASHTO AKR-30, which is the maintenance fleet equipment panel. And then John Hildreth, Kimmel Distinguished Professor at Western Carolina University, and he's the previous chair of that AKR-30 committee, which is a TRB committee. So with that, if you all would like to come up and we'll get their presentation loaded and let them speak next. Thank you.
Thanks for having Henry and I here. We're going to talk in the same theme as what you heard George talk about and Tim talk about, and that is research. And we're here to talk about, as Tim said, we're here to represent the TRB Committee on Equipment, Maintenance, and Fleet. I want to start by talking about, and so a lot of folks in this room know what that is, and I've heard us give this talk before, but some probably haven't. And so I want to take just a couple of minutes here and talk about where we fit, okay? So right now, we're sitting in the lower left-hand corner of the EMTSP, right? This is the larger group of state DOTs that talk about a bunch of stuff, including research. And a lot of folks in this room participate in some of that research either in various ways, and we can talk about that. This is largely, entirely a state DOT organization, right? And then we switch over to the lower right-hand side, which is the equipment twig, which Tim is the chair of, George spoke about, and that is also a largely DOT-focused group, but it's a smaller group, and it's part of the AASHTO MAC. And it's tied very strongly with the AASHTO MAC, which means that handshake between operations and maintenance and operations and equipment, that's really the focus there. And what we do is we're the top because I made the slide, but we're the top piece in that we're the Transportation Research Board, which is an arm of the National Academy of Sciences, which is a big fancy title. It's a group of people that is more than just state DOTs. It's a lot of state DOTs. It's all the state DOTs and a whole bunch more. In a normal year, there'll be 13,000 to 15,000 people attending a TRB conference. Okay? It is a large group of folks. And inside that large group of folks is a whole bunch of small sets of folks. And we're that small set of folks that focuses on maintenance, fleet, and equipment. Okay? And so how do we fit into this group? Well, we all talk about the same kind of stuff. There's a lot of folks that are in this room that are part of that committee. But also on that committee are other people. We bring in some of the, we can bring in some folks like to represent some of the vendor agencies. We can bring in folks to represent some of the municipalities. We bring in folks that have academic backgrounds. And so we have this opportunity to pull this group together that's a little bit bigger, a little bit more broad, I shouldn't say bigger, more broad than just the state DOTs. But certainly state DOTs are there. So that's sort of how we kind of fit into this. And let's talk about what we're interested in. And this is a whole bunch of fancy words that TRB makes every committee have that talks about what's our scope and what's our focus and what do we care about. And you can read all that. But the short answer is we're interested in anything that has to do with equipment and its life cycle and its management. Everything from buying it to running it to maintaining it to selling it, you name it. If it's related to the maintenance fleet and equipment that is your day-to-day life, we're interested in it. And what's that mean to be interested in it? That means that we're interested in the research about it. And that is, we don't do research, but we think about research ideas, much like what Tim just charged you guys with. We think about research ideas, we promote those ideas. As folks do that research, and sometimes we participate, some of us participate in doing it. A lot of folks participate in that they may help provide guidance and insight into those projects. And other folks may participate in that they provide data for those projects. So say we don't do the research generally, but we come up with ideas, we promote it, we sometimes participate at different levels, and we certainly promote the results that we get. And we try to disseminate that amongst our larger community. And that's really what we do. So I'm here after what's apparently been 6 years as the committee chair to say that I'm no longer the committee chair, because TRB limits you to 6 years. But I'm going to stay involved in the committee, but Henry is going to take over as the committee chair. And then we have Lisa Koonsman with research coordinators. Then we have Jeff, who serves as our communications coordinator. So a lot of folks that you guys names you would recognize and know. So who's on the committee? Well, we're about 25 people in size. Like I said, we are heavy on state DOTs. That's intentional, that's beneficial, that's largely the population that we serve. When I say serve, that's who the research benefits. Okay, so we are intentionally heavy on state DOTs. We used to have a lot of those 5 former DOT used to be part of that current group, but like everybody, we all just keep getting older and they retire. But we could use some more current state DOT folks. There's also some academics on the group. They say there's 4. I didn't think there was quite that many of us, but that's cool. And then we have some other public agencies. Those are largely municipalities that get represented. I personally think that's a group that we need more representation from. I think they do a lot of the kinds of things that you guys do, and we should probably be listening and serving them as well. And then we have a handful of consultant and industry representatives. So like I said, it's a broader group. It's not just state DOTs. And it's not just tied to AASHTO, but we try to bring in broader perspectives. Again, with the, as they used to say, TRB, our middle name is research, all right? So we need ideas from lots of folks in order to generate those research ideas and promote that sort of thing. That's really what the committee looks like. And then, as Henry said, we're always looking for additional members. So if you're interested in serving, let me give you a quick nickel tour. There's generally 1 meeting a year. I'm hesitating because it used to be you kind of had to come to DC in January to attend TRB to attend the meetings. But COVID has changed that. There's a whole lot more virtual work going on. There's a lot of challenges for DOT folks to travel, as you guys well know. And so we're finding ways to expand that beyond requiring you to come to DC in January. But there's traditionally a meeting in DC in January in person. We have virtual options for those. And then there's often a mid-year meeting and some conference calls, that sort of thing. So it's not a huge time commitment, but I think the folks that have been on the committee will tell you it is a huge benefit to participate in that. And so if you're interested, let myself or Henry know. And with that, I'll turn this over to Henry.
As John indicated, and I do want to acknowledge John's hard work and tremendous leadership in this committee. As he indicated, he's been doing this for a while. And before John, we were blessed to have Lisa Koonsman. And even before Lisa, we're going all the way back to Glenn Hagler and some other folks. Not many folks in this room probably remember those. In any event, as John indicated, the annual meeting is held in January. If you're interested in participating, we certainly encourage you to do so. This group really is the intersection between the DOT community and the other communities that have similar interests, and the academic community and the consultants that are the folks that try to do this work. So this is just an opportunity to exchange a lot of information, and hopefully the information that comes out of this committee and some of the research that we help guide is obviously intended to be able to be applied by you folks. So it's really important information. We had our mid-year call about a month ago. Several of the folks, and in fact, I do want to take a quick second. Could I ask the folks in this room that are on the TRB committee to hold your hand up just a minute so the other folks know who you are? So yeah, Mike and Melissa and Punya and so on and so forth, John and Danny. But again, those it's a good group, and we enjoy ourselves, and certainly hope that you folks will consider participating. In our mid-year meeting, I mentioned we did some planning for this coming January's meeting, and as it relates to the conversation Tim and George were talking about earlier, we're looking for research needs statements. We're looking for things that you folks would have needs on, and one of the things that I think is a near term and tied directly into the conversations you're going to have after this short presentation is that we're looking to fill a couple of lectern sessions in January, and that's an opportunity to invite presenters to come in and speak on topics that are very timely. I know in the conversation we had, and maybe this is some fodder for your discussions here and your breakout sessions coming up, that we were looking at what kind of topics do we find that are needed. There's information needed. So in that recent call, electric vehicles tended to dominate the conversation. There was a whole lot of conversation around the new transportation bill that was passed in December and all the money that is put to the DOTs, and of course that's not really coming to you guys, and in fact that's a much longer term thing for you guys. But the long and short of it is all that money is placed the DOTs in the leadership position of expanding the EV infrastructure across the U.S. And that's really going to have your bosses and the maintenance folks and the construction folks and the agency leadership looking at this EV challenge. What does that mean? And if we're going to be leading this engagement, we're going to have to walk the talk. So I think we're going to find that you're going to have a lot more emphasis down at the fleet level of how we're going to try to, where's the DOT fleet going to be in 10 years and how do we get there? So the long and short of it is, there was a lot of discussion around electric vehicles. When you're in your breakout sessions, is that things that, what kind of topic could you have discussed at this lectern session or in terms of research needs related to that help you to figure those things out? As someone who's had a little involvement in those projects, I can tell you they're complicated. It takes a lot of lead time to get the utilities involved. It takes a lot of facility planning. Lots of times you don't have facilities that have the capability of supporting these things. So the long and short of it, there's topics around EV. Got a couple of other areas where there were some mentions came up at our last meeting. A lot of discussion on supply chain issues. Lots of frustration that there was really no one had a solution on that. I know Dalton's giving a presentation tomorrow about some of the things they've done at TxDOT on this area. But it's something all you folks are struggling with right now, supply chain issues. There was a question about whether we would want to have to try to capture some of the lessons we learned from the pandemic on how do you deal with issues where you can't have remote working and you have to try to do cleaning of vehicles on a, every time somebody, you change drivers in a vehicle. All these kind of things, is there a need to try to capture some of those lessons learned from that while we still remember them? It's pretty easy to lose that stuff once it's behind you a little bit. So those were just some topics that were kicked around on this last call, and certainly that's fodder hopefully for you folks to think about. Are any of those topics things that would be of benefit for you folks that you would like to see a research needs statements come out of? Is it information you would like to see try to have us in the near term, I'm talking between now and January, to try to identify some presenters that can speak to some of those topics? So that again, that's just sort of bringing you up to speed with what we were involved in there. I'm just going to quickly give you a little bit of information about, and this is sort of, I think Tim did a really nice job of recapping some of the stuff that's been done so that we don't reinvent the wheel. I think nobody really wants to be doing that. In the triennial strategic plan for this committee, we identified some things that were, as part of that effort, that we considered to be in scope for the work that the committee does, and stuff that was out of scope. Some of it's short-term and some of it was long-term. But in essence, what you're seeing here, that in the short-term things that were within scope, we were looking at low emissions, zero emission vehicles and equipment. What does that mean? We've talked about that. How does that mean in terms of maintenance? What does it mean in terms of replacement criteria? What does it mean in terms of managing these things and supporting these things? Connected vehicles, we got this connected vehicle infrastructure and so on. I mentioned supply chain issues. Aging fleets has come up, and I'm not going to continue to run through that thing, but you can, in a nutshell, you can see that this strategic plan sort of guides we find the boxes, or at least we try to define the boxes where we're trying to work, or at least we see this industry working, and we're looking for you folks to weigh in with your research needs to try to help us guide where we're going in those areas. Some of the recent projects we've done, this is the projects that we actually have. If you go out there, you see on the right-hand side of that slide, there's an actual web address. RNS stands for Research Needs Statement. If you do a search on that website and use the equipment committee AKR-30 as the search term, you'll see this list of 7 projects. These are projects we've already fleshed out. They've already got some text wrapped around these topics. As you can see, 4 of those are recent ones that came up this year. In fact, the most recent one of the 4, the last one, was one that John White just submitted here last week to us, and I'm not even sure if it's up on the website quite yet. But these are things that came up that we've spent, at least some folks have spent a little time trying to get their hands around what does this mean. We'd encourage you to look at that. We got internet here. You can look these things up, and I won't go through them individually, but you can see there's some ideas about things that perhaps you folks may wish to consider, or at least see where there has already been some ideas put around this thing to try to to get a little framework for some of these things that are going on. And as mentioned, I do want to recognize Lisa Koonsman, who is the chair of the RNS group, and Lisa does a good job of trying to help us keep up there. The last thing I'm going to talk about, this is the last slide, because I didn't want to take a lot of your time this morning, but this group is actively engaged in trying to talk with the other AASHTO committees. We have members that are liaisons to other groups within AASHTO, the maintenance committee, the winter maintenance committee. I'm actually a member of a transit committee. And we also are reach out to other organizations. In fact, some of you all, if you don't participate, some do, some don't. APWA, I'm actually will be a national conference in Charlotte in August, where a lot of the same kind of things that we're talking about that are these issues, they're going to be talking about at the APWA group, and I'm actually on an EV committee of the APWA. So in other words, the long and the short of it is we're trying to, as John mentioned, research is the central name of the, in the Transportation Research Board. So we're trying to pull in all these different interests related to research and essentially trying to figure out how we can help serve you folks. And as we indicate here, we want to be a resource to this group, and we're very interested and proud of the opportunity to serve you folks. So with that, I'll just say I hope you have a good conference here. It's for what it's worth, I don't think anybody I came to before this group existed, I came to Sacramento in 2000, the year 2000 for the first group, and there were 15 folks from DOTs there. That was all that could make the travel. So it's really a pleasure to see a large group here, and this is really a tip of the hat to those folks who managed to organize the EMTSP committee. This has really been a good, obviously it's really done a great job about giving you a way to try to meet and come together. So that's it for me. Is there any questions for John or myself about the TRB AKR-30 committee?
One of the things that Tim charged us with, I think, or just turn this off and I'll shut up, but was sort of encouraging you to think about research needs, because you're going to come back in this room about 3, 4 o'clock this afternoon hopefully with ideas. You're going to evaluate those, vote on those. You heard all about that, right? One of the charges for Henry and I was to sort of juice you up a little bit, so to speak, in terms of research, which is not a very easy topic to juice people up about, let's be honest. And so what I wanted to just take a minute and say, look, research is this thing that I'm going to step out on what I think is a pretty sturdy limb and say the folks in this room aren't involved in research, aren't really doing research, involved in research on a day-to-day basis. And so to ask you to come up with research ideas and that sort of thing is maybe, if I was in your shoes, it would be a little bit intimidating to me. And so what I want to do is just take a second and encourage you to think about, yeah, maybe you're not deeply involved in the research, but I think after having heard from George and Tim this morning, a lot of what you do on a day-to-day basis is touched and influenced by the research. And so don't be intimidated by this big R word, but think about your day-to-day and how that works. And I made some notes. Bear with me for just a second. George said, and I paraphrase, but master the fundamentals. Right? You guys need to master the fundamentals in what you do. Do the stuff that you do every day very, very, very well. And research can be documenting. It doesn't have to be this great search for knowledge that academics often make it out to be. It can be documenting the things that you do at a very high level so that other folks can know about those. Right? That's research. So what are the things on a day-to-day basis, the fundamentals that you do well or need to do better, and you want to know more about? That's a research idea, okay? It's embrace and incorporate new technologies and processes. So some of this research is very forward thinking. Some of this stuff that we're talking about, right, is not next year's stuff. It's next decade stuff, and that's cool. That's the really cool research that gets some of the real academic folks juiced up. But it doesn't have to be that stuff. Right? It can be the stuff that you do on a day-to-day basis. It can be next year's stuff or the next year's stuff or next decade stuff. So don't get intimidated thinking that you need to be in Star Wars mindset to think way out into the future. Okay, this research stuff can be now. It can be the stuff you're doing now. Because, and I've seen this in action, I don't know, 10 years ago. North Carolina DOT, I got a project with them to do some research. It wasn't entirely geared towards staving off privatization, but it certainly wasn't far from that. Right? George said most of the folks in this room, and I think he's right, have at some point had to answer the question, why are we not privatizing the fleet? And what's behind that is, well, surely they can do it better. Well, we don't need to argue about that, but I think what comes with that is an expectation for us to do better. Right? There are always opportunities in everything that we do to do something better. And research is nothing more than a means to try to get to that next step towards better. Okay, so don't get too intimidated or overwhelmed by this big word that you think is 10, 20 Star Wars years out. Research can be now. Research can be next year. Research can be that next step towards better. And it's just a means to get that next step taken.
To tack onto that a little bit, there are really multiple vehicles for us to get this research accomplished. I mean, there are the full-blown research needs statements that we submit, they review and rank and prioritize, and it gets accepted for funding. And that process is from start to end product is sometimes 3 years, 4 years. I mean, it just depends on how extensive and what the research looks like. And sometimes, the way this works, what was important 4 years ago, now you've got your results, it's less important today. And so you have to kind of think about some of those things. What makes a good research project, knowing that you've got that time lag. But there are other ways to there are scan tours that you can do. In other words, a group of folks can go out and visit states that are doing things right and try and learn from them and then share those results through some sort of a report mechanism. That's a lot quicker. There are synthesized reports where a researcher will pull states and figure out, how they do certain things, and they synthesize those results together into a report and can be shared amongst the community. So there's several ways that research can get accomplished, and one topic isn't necessarily a good scan tour, it's a full-blown research, but another one might be a good scan tour, whatever. And so you can be thinking about that as well as you talk about potential research. Henry, did you have anything else?
As Tim was indicating on, that this is sort of a vague topic and something you certainly don't think about every day. But the bottom line is what we're trying to figure out is what things do you need help on? Where do you need resources? Where could additional information help you do your job? That's ultimately what this is all about, is trying to provide you information you don't have, or you don't think the information you have is tailored to you. It really doesn't meet your needs as a DOT fleet manager. And that's the things that we would expect to see you folks float up, was where are your common holes of knowledge? Where could you use additional information? Where could there be additional guidance? And in some instances, a lot of these recent reports that Tim mentioned were the effort to essentially establish standards, something akin to the Green Book kind of things that the maintenance and the construction folks go through, so that at least you have something you can go to your bosses with and say, here is guidance on this topic, rather than you and I just arguing about this. So, but again, John and I will be here. We're here the whole conference. We'll be talking about some of the other projects as we're going. But ultimately, we want to serve you guys and try to see what we can do to assist with your needs. And like I say, this is, this group, at least in my mind, is sort of where the crossroads, or where the DOT practitioners meet the academics and the consultants, in trying to figure out a way that we can work together to assist each other. So, with that in mind, I appreciate your time, and it's always a pleasure to be in front of you folks.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.